everyone. Welcome back to 2325 Fitness, your favorite health and fitness podcast. Today, we have with us Astrid. She is a clinical dietitian and a nutritionist. And one of the main reasons why I wanted to bring on Astrid and have the discussion is because I think this is one of the key elements that's overlooked and undermined when it comes to health and fitness. A lot of times people go like, "Oh, I can eat whatever I want. I'm eating this and these things, but my body looks soft. I don't look as aesthetic. I don't feel strong, but I'm working hard in the gym." So that's why Astrid is here with us to discuss how nutrition is actually the key and the most important thing when it comes to health and fitness. So Astrid, to start us off, what got you into nutrition? What intrigued you to go towards this route? Was it a experience that you had, or was it just an interest that you had? How did it start for you?
Well, it's a long story, but I will try to make it short.
Sure.
Basically, when I was like 12 years old or something like that, I started at the gym and basically started working out, and I started looking at how personal trainers were talking with clients and like, oh, I would like to get a personal trainer too. And I realized that when I did that, the personal trainer basically was giving pretty much like a very basic diet to every one of the clients. It was quite restrictive, and like obviously if you follow that just
Sure.
by itself, because there's no calculations, there's a lot of restriction in that, you will lose weight, definitely. And say like, I really want to learn how to build and create menus and meal plans, because I think this would be very, very helpful for me, because I was at that time, I was just thinking about how can I just do my own thing for myself and be skinny. Like that was in my head. That was the only thing I wanted to do. So after, obviously, well, this can be also a business. And then I became personal trainer too, but mostly in the group setting. So I was a fitness instructor doing classes and that kind of thing. And then long away, like perhaps when I was 15 years old, 3 years later, I did mostly courses around personal training. So I did a little bit of everything. And then I got into a university where I had either to choose from medicine or physiotherapy or nutrition. So I had the three in my list, and I decided, well, I'm happy to go either way, but I don't think I want to study the rest of my life with medicines, and that takes a long time.
Yep.
So, and every time I see blood, I faint. So I don't think that's going to be a really good idea. So my other two options were physiotherapy and nutrition. And in between these two, when I heard that physiotherapy needed like physics and maths, I'm like, no, I don't want to do that either. So my last resource was nutrition. So I was like, well, I think that I like biochemistry, I like chemistry. I don't know, I think that's a really good idea. And actually I would like to being able to help people and also help myself. So in few words, basically that's why I decided to do nutrition. When I started, I basically was in the first semester, and I was trying to look for the subjects from the 8th semester, when you see human nutrition and how to create meal plans and everything, because you don't see any of that until you're actually around the 6th semester upwards. So I was like, first semester, I was actually trying to jump to find subjects and read through lots of stuff about it. So I did my own research, and I did learn quite a few things. So when I was at the 8th semester, I was actually, oh, I know all of this. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's great. So it was much easier to navigate those semesters that I had already explored. And yeah, and I realized that nutrition is much more complex than just a meal plan, because that's what the only thing I thought about when I looked at nutrition is like just a diet, a menu, losing weight. That's the only thing that is in my head, but actually was far beyond that when I started looking at anatomy, biochemistry, physiology, physiopathology. there was so much. And then the actual human nutrition and clinical nutrition, um, therapeutic nutrition for all these nutrition, like medical conditions. Like, oh my God, this is so, so cool. And it's so profound that obviously it opened my mind to, well, this is so huge. I could do so many things with nutrition, and I can, it is not just about losing weight. Like, this is just a tiny, tiny bit that people think
Yeah.
that that's only nutrition, but nutrition is just so, so huge. So basically that's what I where and I started looking into getting an understanding what did I like. So I did some of my internships before graduating at hospitals. So I was enjoying bariatric surgery, like being a dietitian for bariatric patients, surgical patients. So everything related to clinical was really, really interesting. So that's why I am currently part-time clinical dietitian in a hospital, and sometimes I go to like a more surgical hospital, to say it in some way. So I keep that fresh, but mostly the other, let's say 60% of my time is dedicated to online coaching, mindset, nutrition, binge eating, healing your
Right.
relationship with food. So I combine these two things, and I think it complements really well to my two passions, helping people. I think I am more like a psychologist sometimes for clients, because I just sometimes I don't even speak about nutrition at all. It's more just listening to what they're going through and navigating their challenges and strategies, rather than actually just looking at their diet. So these two things complement really well, and that's who I am and what I do.
That's absolutely amazing because it's not when it comes to a lot of nutrition, dieting, and especially like food in itself, especially when people who lose a lot of weight, they develop a barrier, a mental disorder with the food, a really bad relationship with food. And that's where probably you come in, as you just mentioned, and you listen to them, you try to understand where they're coming from, and you give them solutions that help them cope with that. And now I know you just mentioned that, when you first started working out, you were just looking at, specific meal plans that were very restrictive, and we now also we unfortunately we see that, no carbs, no fat, low carb, like completely eliminate a macronutrient. What are some of the misconceptions that you have seen, over the past years in your experience, and that still continue to like plague the mindset of people when it comes to healthy living?
I think the most important thing to start with is, like, people try to overcomplicate nutrition, and when they start, they think they have to do everything perfect, and everything has to be in a certain way as is being promoted by the fitness industry or the weight loss industry. And that seems to be like, you either cut calories very, very deeply, like you have to slash your calories in half from where you're eating now.
Yeah.
You have to cut your carbohydrates. You have to stop eating junk food completely. Only eat clean, only organic food. You can't buy just conventional because that's poison. There's so much that goes beyond just basically starting your journey with very simple, easy steps. And that's one of the main things that I feel like endangers the route of someone starting their weight loss journey, or trying to just be healthier. It is that there's so much information out there that, and it's so contradictory with the same statements, like, oh, you need protein but not too much, and don't run, but you can't just walk. You have to sleep 8 hours, but don't sleep too much or too little. So it's like, what do I do? It's so much, and it's just so. What do I do? This is one thing that is one recommendation, but then it contradicts with someone else. Just don't eat too much, but make sure you're not eating or not starving yourself.
Right.
Like, it's really, really confusing, and I understand how people can fall easily into this confusing traps, because you don't really know, unless someone who is really advocating for you and know their own thing, how can they help you? So I think it is just a matter of trying to make things easy and basic and start from there. Just start somewhere where you can understand the basics. Like if you understand what your baseline is, start from improving your baseline just a little bit and see what happens. Whether it's like if it's your steps, your at 2,000 steps, the better and the easier strategy is, well, if that's your baseline, let's jump on to 5,000 steps a day. So it's not like something crazy. It doesn't have to be like if you're level 2, you have to jump all the way to level 10. It is progressive and steadily, and that's why I promote a lot of sustainable approach. Sure. And sustainable nutrition, because that's what you need to look at if you really want to find strategies and implement things that are going to serve you to get your results for longer term, and you can actually maintain them over time, not just do something for a quick fix and then just lose everything you did because you never really appreciated and learned all the skills you needed that go with it to maintain what you achieve. And that's what really makes the most important part of coaching, is guiding, teaching, and bringing awareness on the importance of all these skills, habits, and mindset changes that you have to implement for the rest of your life if you really want to find a sustainable and long-term results and success.
Sure, absolutely. And it's really interesting you mentioned that, because I personally have been on both ends of the spectrum. I was at one point, I was 200 pounds, heavy kid, and I lost weight. And when I was first cutting food, it was like moderation, moderation. And then I became to a point where, like, okay, now I should not eat this, I should not eat that. I would eat little and I would just freak out. I would eat, like, maybe binge eat over the weekend and be like, oh, what have I done? And there was also a time where I would say I was probably as my leanest. There was like a month span where I ate completely clean. I didn't have junk food. I tracked everything religiously, but I didn't like it. After the one whole month, I was like, as soon as that month ended for me, I went back to my eating habits. And of course, naturally you water weight, everything, you gain some weight back on. And then I realized, what? There has to be definitely a sustainable way to do this. Nobody can live for the rest of life eating rice, chicken, broccoli, and then go like, this is what I want to do for the rest of life. It's very interesting that you just mentioned that that's where the coaching and nutrition perspective comes into play. Now, Astrid, I know, and of course, it's the most common thing that we all know. It's all about, well, it's probably more than this, but it's mainly about the calorie game, the calorie in versus calorie out. Now, I think our listeners and the audience would most be curious to know, which is, again, the most common question: how can I find what my calories are? How can I, based on my activity level, if I'm sedentary, if I'm active, how can I find what my exact calories are to maintain, lose weight, or put on some muscle?
This is a really good question, and it comes back to the same answer I gave you for the first question. People try to overcomplicate it way too much. It's like, oh, do I need a exactly precise number? What my calories should be? And it really isn't that complicated at all, because it comes back to just finding a starting point based on the data that you can provide at that point, your baseline, and knowing that there is not like necessarily a specific equation or an accurate way to do it. And the most relatively accurate way to do it is based on your own data that you can accumulate at least for 2 weeks by just implementing your starting points. So if you take any equation that is out there, whether it's a very complicated one that like Harris and Benedict, or like Cunningham, or any other of these equations, you can input the data that is requested. Some of them need for you to have your body fat and your body composition nailed down. So if you know that, you can input that information. So your lean body mass, and what's your fat mass, and what's your age, and your height, and whether you're female or male. So there's so much detail that you can put into it to estimate your basal metabolic rate. And your basal metabolic rate can be estimated through all of these different equations. Some of them might overestimate a little bit, some of them might underestimate a little bit. So because there's no way to really say which one is going to exactly align to what your metabolism is, you just need to get any and just to get started. So choose whatever you want, whichever you find. If you can input your lean body mass and your fat mass, maybe it will help you to be a slightly more accurate to a more realistic number to where you're at, but it doesn't really matter if you don't really know it. So you just put that information, you get your basal metabolic rate, and have an analysis of what your physical activity is. Are you someone who is relatively active, sedentary? Are you exercising as well quite a lot? So do you actually train consistently at least 3 to 4 times a week? So when you understand and kind of pinpoint where you probably are in terms of physical activity, you add that activity factor to that equation, and the equation is going to yield a number that could be a combination of your basal metabolic rate plus your physical activity. That is going to tell you an estimated total energy daily expenditure, or your TDEE. And with that, you basically going to, the only way that you can know what to do with that is put it into practice. Okay, sure. I don't know whether this is exactly my maintenance calories, and actually my maintenance calories is going to be always a range. It's not something it's just a target number that you pinpoint at. Like if the equation gives you 2,000 calories, it is actually probably between 10% up and 10% down, that number. It could be even a little bit higher than 10%. But let's say it gives you a range. It's probably 1990, 1980, and 2000 calories, 20 calories, something like that. It's just going to be a range. So if you have that range, then you're just based on you're going to put that into practice for the next 2 weeks, and also monitor your weight. Probably if you can on a regular basis, on a daily basis, under the same conditions, probably the best way is to do it fasted with no clothes on, after emptying your bowels, not drinking water, anything, but always under the same conditions, and record that and get average of that as well. So if you go with the mindset of being your own, your own judge, just with experimental mindset, sure. It is going to be really interesting to see how your data goes in the next 2 weeks. If your weight goes up, obviously you're probably in a surplus and not necessarily at your maintenance calories. And if you lose weight, maybe you need more calories to find your maintenance calories. So that is going to be a more
practical approach.
To be a more practical way. Obviously, the downside of this method is it takes time, and right. We don't have patience. So I think that will be the only con for this method, but it's the most practical and the most accurate if you want to simply get started with something that you will find the most accurate way once you kind of nail it down in the next 2 weeks. And probably might take a month, because if you didn't actually get it the right time, you will have to adjust and see what happens. But at the end of the day, it is not just about that. It is about really finding a way to, how can I still manage to modify my habits, my mindset, my behaviors? Calories are going to, obviously, energy balance is going to dictate whether you maintain, lose, or gain weight. But at the end of the day, that's not the only thing that matters if you can't change what is in your brain, in your mind, in your habits, in your regular behaviors, and how you feel, how you manage your emotions, your stress, your sleep. So all of these things around your lifestyle are as important as managing calories. Okay. And you sometimes don't necessarily need to count calories, but they still count. So there's a lot of people that complain that, oh, well, I just don't want to count calories. How can I get away from that? So there are ways that you can do that, but you don't necessarily need to count calories to lose weight. But it is a much more precise way, an objective way to go about it, because you exactly, when you're tracking your macros and your calories, you know exactly what's the food you're eating, how much is in your food, what kind of macro ratio you have between each food, which ones are sources of protein, which ones are more like sources of carbohydrates and sources of fat. So it gives you such a huge awareness that actually teaches you a lot. Then at the end of the day, if you do have quite a few practice tracking, you can ultimately know your own food, and you probably don't need to track for the rest of your life. But it's something that is like a learning curve, and you still have to go through that process if you really want to be proficient at just eyeballing your food and estimating roughly how much calories or how much you're eating just from seeing your food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned, the biggest key is patience and experience that plays a role in understanding what your calories are. And I think one of the best ways, from my personal experience, that I can share is that keep certain things consistent. Like keep your protein consistent, keep your anything that's like high protein, and like you can always play around with your carbs and fats. So it gives you an idea of at least what your protein is, what your carbs are, what your fats are. That way people don't lose their mind when they one night suddenly binge eat or eat like a pizza, and next day they're like 10 pounds heavier, which is not like really fat per se, but that's just the weight they put on from eating the heavy food. And I know you just mentioned about macronutrients. So how crucial or important it is. I mean, of course, we're talking about like a general, an average person who's just trying to lose weight, stay in good shape, calories, macros, it all comes together. As someone who's specific towards aesthetics, an athlete or like a bodybuilder, or someone who just wants to like, look really good in addition to feeling good, how important it is for them to like have specific macros or hit those macros or play around with the macros and make sure that they're actually hitting the target, not going over or under.
It depends a lot on the goal for that person. And that's going to be primarily the one thing that is going to dictate how your macros would look like. But your macros are dictated by your total calories as well. So if you know you're someone who is trying to lose body fat, you will have to create first a calorie deficit. If you don't create a calorie deficit, you might not lose weight, even if you have your macro ratios nailed down.
Sure.
So knowing what your calories are and what your calorie goal is to begin with, like whether it's a surplus, whether you just want to maintain, whether you just want to lose weight, or whether you need to start reversing from a very low calories if you're a chronic dieter, then you have to know exactly what to do. And the second thing that you have to put in place is your estimating adequate amount of protein to begin with. So that would be your primary calculation after you know your calories, and estimating at least between 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. You could go between that range if you want to ensure you're getting adequate amount of protein for keeping your lean body mass or preventing muscle loss if you're in a calorie deficit, or to ensuring adequate muscle protein synthesis if you're trying to gain muscle or trying to improve your hypertrophy gains. So that's the first thing you want to know. And then when it comes to carbohydrates and fats ratio, like which one is most important, the research is very clear that there doesn't seem to be very compelling about what is most important. You can either go higher fat or higher carb, and that's not going to make any difference. It's just more about a preference and what are you able to, how do you feel best, which one, which type of macro makes you feel better when it's in higher quantities. And that's going to be crucial for ensuring sustainability and adherence to whatever you're going to do. So carbohydrates are have obviously shown that if you consume adequate amount of carbohydrates and you're an athlete, you're someone who is training consistently, exercising, and you have a fairly active lifestyle, having a higher carbohydrate diet is going to actually make things easier and improve recovery, improve performance, give you more energy throughout the day. But on the other hand, someone who probably still is still active but they prefer higher fat, they can still do that and have less carbohydrates, and they still going to feel better with that particular ratio, and they will be able to sustain it. So at the end of the day, what is the most important thing is finding what works for you and how can you adhere to it on the long term. So protein is kind of a non-negotiable,
Yeah.
and after that, carbohydrates and fats aren't really a big concern. It's mostly what do you want to achieve? Are you someone who's really active? Do you like carbohydrates in the first place? If you love carbohydrates, then you want to make sure you're adding more carbohydrates in your diet so you don't feel that's lacking. And then adjust fats. I would say the only caveat of this is you don't want to go lower than 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight of fat, because fat is an essential macronutrient that is required for a lot of different things, including hormones. So if you're not having adequate amount of fat intake, you're probably putting at risk your hormonal production, hormonal balance. So you want to make sure you're having at least a little bit of that. That is a non-negotiable too. But then there is an excess of fat that you probably can play with. Same with carbohydrates.
And I think that's where the role of supplements, especially in bodybuilders and people who have like really big physiques, come into play, because they just can't naturally get the fat, like the omega 3s and all those, from just regular food. So they have to take those pills and those tablets. So, Ashraf, in your opinion, or I mean, again, you work with a lot of clients, you've seen it. Does macronutrient make play a huge role in how your body looks, or is that more of, again, just a calorie game?
It is more an energy balance game, but at the same time, when we look at the minutia of your like your diet composition, it seems to have much an impact on hunger management and appetite regulation than any other thing. So when you pay attention to like highly nutrient dense foods that are whole foods, they just have more fiber content, they're more filling. You can have certainty that whatever you eat, you're going to feel satiated, and that comes down especially to be very important if you're someone who is trying to lose body weight and body fat. If you're trying to change your body composition and you're in a calorie deficit, being really strategic about the foods you choose are going to really have an impact on how you succeed during the day and managing hunger. And at the end of the day, hunger management and appetite regulation is a major component of success.
Sure,
If
absolutely.
you are able to get through that appetite and hunger management, cravings, all of that, and you can put that, nail it down, you're going to for sure succeed in your fat loss journey. But if that is not nailed down, you will fail potentially, because you will be starving all the time. You will be craving food that you probably are not going to allow you to succeed in the way you want to succeed, or they might potentially just slow down the journey and make it longer. So it is just a trade-off. Sometimes you can decide, well, I just want to do it this way because this is the way I feel good and I have no rush. In that case, that's fine. But if you're someone who has a specific time frame, a specific goal, like a bodybuilder that has to jump on stage in 16 weeks, 24 weeks, they have to play with the time, and they can't waste time to making mistakes. So nutrient dense foods, managing appetite and hunger is key if they want to succeed in their journey and try to be more as efficient as possible.
Absolutely. And now I think it's very important to understand that, calorie deficit, people think that, oh, if I'm in a calorie deficit, if I hit my goals, I won't feel hungry. I'm good. But then people don't realize that, hunger is a part of it. It is a form of starvation, calculated starvation, as I call it, to put you in a
Control
fat,
starvation.
but yeah, control starvation, right? Now, what are some things that you would say that you've helped people deal with, and even in your personal day to day when it comes to fat loss that you do is to cope with the hunger? I mean, I know drinking water, a lot of water helps, but what are some other ways where people don't just lose their mind and go on like binge eating? Okay, I'm just gonna snack on like three yogurts or like almonds and so on.
One of those is obviously knowing your foods and having good recipes that have like low calorie but a lot of volume. For example, for dinner, I've been having a combination of these very low calorie konjac noodles. They have like 20 calories, and there's like 200 grams. It's a
Yeah,
lot of that.
yeah,
And I combine that with like zucchini noodles. Like 200 grams of that is quite a lot. So I'm having a dinner of just from that is like 500 grams, which is a lot. Like it fills up two bowls. And on top of that, I add some tomato paste and chicken breast. And that makes a huge meal. And that's filling and it's under 400 calories, only those two bowls. So knowing some recipes is something that is not necessarily spoken very much. They just tell you, well, you have to eat protein, and that's just a non-negotiable. As I said before, you have to eat more protein, you have to eat more high fiber food, so making sure you include in your vegetables at least twice, even if you can 3 times a day or more. That is going to really help you to have that micronutrient nailed down, but at the same time you're going to feel more satiated because of the volume and the fiber content of that. Allowing yourself to have breakfast.
sure.
Some people feel like they have to skip breakfast because they want to save calories for later, and that's fair enough if you have no issues with your relationship with food. But if you have somehow poor relationship with food, and you're probably someone who's more at risk of binging, I think one of the most important things is that you allow yourself to have breakfast, a nutritious breakfast that is going to set up your day for success. And the mindset towards food completely nail it down to you can allow yourself to have everything you want. So any food is off limits. Anything is good or bad, but just knowing that sometimes it is good to fit in some of your treat foods, your soul foods, things you do
Mm.
enjoy and like, that can be part of your calories if you track it. And that's the other positive thing about tracking. If you're
Yep.
tracking, you know that you can take whatever you like every now and then and fit it in your calories. And if you're still in a calorie deficit, you're still going to do a lot of progress.
Sure.
So if you're not tracking, sometimes it's very tricky to know whether that would fit into your diet, or whether is that just going to blow your it's going to blow your macros and your calories. But if you're tracking, you know your shit. You know exactly
Yep.
what how much you're eating, what are you eating, and if that fits into your calories, then your peace of mind is so much better. So that's one of the positive things as well about tracking that I just came across when I was explaining about this. Um, and I think that's one of the most important things as well, is having nutrient dense volume foods, high volume foods, lower calories, that can help you to manage that. And yeah, I think making sure you including nutrient dense micronutrients with your vegetables. I'm not a very like a fruit person, but like if
Sure.
you want to add fruit into your diet, you can also do that as well. um, there's so many ways that you can go about it, but one of the other strategy that seems to be underrated is sleep management
Hmm.
and mindful eating. So
Right.
if you're managing your sleep really well, you're sleeping well, that is going to help you a lot with craving
Craving your
management,
hunger. Sure.
appetite, and to protect your lean body mass, especially if you are in a calorie deficit. Now,
Yeah.
if if you if in addition to that, if you are someone who starts paying attention to the speed that you eat, the
Mhm.
flavor of the food, the intensity of the food, flavors,
Chewing
the
your food
scent.
properly, I think people just
Yeah,
like
all
swallow the food all the way down without even enjoying it, just like gobble it
yeah.
up.
So if you put everything that all your senses into your food and you slow down, that also allows you to have a better and pleasant experience while eating. And that is also beneficial to make sure you're actually eating and paying attention.
Sure.
Because if you're mindlessly eating, you can easily overeat and you don't even tasting your food. You're not even enjoying the. So it's like a wasted calories. It's like I just spent $2,000 in something that I didn't even like, and
Yeah.
it's just wasted money. So the same is with your calories and your budget of your calories. If you're eating something, at least pay attention to it. Make sure you're enjoying it. You're putting all your senses on it, and you make every penny worth it of your calories.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important to understand that again, the key factor here is to build that relationship. You know, you're not your body is going to be fueled by that food you eat. And if you're not enjoying it, if you're not giving your body the proper nutrient, if you're not like being in the moment of eating, you know, whatever it may be, then you're just gonna be like, oh, I don't think I enjoyed my food or I'm not satisfied. And I think snacking also, in certain extent, like having really low calorie snacks like Greek yogurts, like something of those sort, for most people, as you mentioned, you know, you're not into fruits, but someone who's into fruits can use that to make smoothies, low calorie stuff to like crave their hunger. So I think that's really good point that you brought up. And now I know you were just talking about like breakfast, right? How it's important. What would you say again? This is the industry standard, but you can give your unbiased opinion about like diets such as, you know, keto, paleo, intermittent fasting, like these very popular diets. What have you seen? Again, I know it's person to person. Some people do it, some people don't. But what would you recommend? What have you seen like the success rate of going on these diets on a long-term basis is?
The only thing I would say is that any of those diets might work if that works for you and if it's something that you can stick to for the rest of your life. If you're someone who likes keto, there's no issue with that. You just need to make sure that's the right approach for you and you can follow it for the long term, but at the same time, pay attention to the quality of your food because you can do a very shitty keto diet or you can
Sure.
do a very good quality keto diet. So that is important as well. Equal, same as vegans or vegetarian diet. You can go into a plant-based or vegetarian diet with very shitty foods and very poor selections that are not really going to make you healthier. So you have to choose something that is obviously aligned with longevity, long-term health, and that is obviously any diet that has or that allows you to eat highly nutrient dense foods, mostly unprocessed, or I would say less junk food or ultra processed foods or eating out, and mostly things that you can control and eat from home. Those kind of things are going to be essentially important if you want to make sure the 80% of your diet is very nutritious, regardless whether it's paleo, whether it's keto, whether it is whatever it is. After that, you have a 20% that you can obviously play with, which are any of these foods that we call highly palatable foods or soul or treat foods, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And that is going to potentially be very processed, will have high saturated fats or high sugar. But if it's part of your daily, if it's 20% of your diet, it's not a huge amount and it's not something that you're eating on a regular basis, you can see perfectly that it will fit into your healthy diet. So I would say whichever diet is going to work for you is the one that you can stick to for the rest of your life, or at least find that it is easy for you to do it and you don't see that it's a sacrifice or that you have to do it because it's the only way to achieve your specific result.
And I think one smart way to look about it is that if you are bouncing off one diet to another in a span of 1 month, a few months, then I think it's a sign that that diet is not really working out for you. Now, Astrid, when it comes to dieting, would you say carb cycling is that also a form of a diet, or is it more of a strategic approach for how you want to like balance your calories? Carb
I would
cycling or
say,
carb cycling and even calorie cycling, I guess they kind of
yeah,
fall on the same line.
Yeah, well, they're a little bit different though, because with calorie cycling, it is mostly like your total weekly budget of calories, and you basically allocate some days will be lower and some other days will be higher calories based on your lifestyle, and some days that you probably know that you're going to have more more appetite, a bigger hunger, or you'll have an event, so you have a social event or something like that
Sure.
that is going to involve more food, or some days you just not feel as hungry, and some other days you feel hungry. So if you really know what your needs are and how you want to distribute your calories, you might not necessarily need to go every day with the same amount of calories. So that's what cycling your calories is about, and it's just a tool to help adherence. Again, whatever is going to make your diet more sustainable and much more manageable. On the other hand, carb cycling is more like a strategic tool that you can use, especially beneficial in athletes,
Yeah.
where you sometimes you might need a much more amount of carbohydrates to for fuel than the days that perhaps you're not performing, or your performance is not necessarily an important outcome. But it is not magical. It is not something that is going to make a difference. And this is a tool that is being used with the wrong approach. Let's say, like if you go low carbohydrates, you're going to reduce your glycogen storage, and then you're going to use your fat storage as a fuel. And that is probably truth. But again, if that is going to lead on the long term to binging and inconsistencies, that is going to result in a inefficient way to go about your fat loss. But if you're going to use the carbohydrate cycling as a way to manage or work around performance, then with that right approach, maybe it might be worth to use it. But it's not something that is going to make a huge impact if you know how to what your better make macro ratio is once you're starting setting up your diet to begin with.
So I mean, these are again, as you just mentioned, these are all like really good tools, but you have to be, no matter what diet you choose, no matter what route you take, it's just about being smart. And of course, the basis starts with tracking everything before you get to a point where you don't have to track anymore. Now, I just want to touch quickly upon like actually bring it back to calories, right? Now, again, it's a calorie in, calorie out. Now, for someone who is, let's say he's in a 500, he or she is a 500 calorie deficit, and they do their workout, cardio, whatever it is, and they burn again approximately another 5 to 700 calories. Does that mean they're in like 1,000 to 1,200 calorie deficit? And should they eat the calories they burned? Or how does that work when it comes to really honing down into your calories? Because a lot of time people kind of get stuck into that loop of like, okay, so I'm cutting this many calories, but I'm burning this many calories. So now if I eat back these 500 calories, I'm still in a deficit of 500.
Yeah, it is tricky because you definitely, when you're exercising, you're obviously burning additional calories that if you were at rest. But that doesn't mean like you exactly know how many calories are you burning. We can only estimate what we eat, and that's still subject to error because of the labels. The foods are just mostly the labels and the data, the food data that we get into our apps, mostly food averages. They're not necessarily very specific or very precise, but this is still a very relatively accurate data. But however, when we think about calories out and how much calories you burn in a training session, it could be they could be off by up to 90%
Right.
from the real accuracy of what you actually burn. So some equipment, some watches, and some technology might be relatively accurate, but you can't rely on that necessarily.
Sure.
And I wouldn't be thinking that I'm just going to exercise to burn calories off. I want to use exercise as part of, like, with a different approach. You want to exercise because you want to feel good. You're going to prevent muscle loss. You're going to build muscle. You get stronger at the gym. You gain confidence. You drain stress. that's why you do exercise.
Sure.
Not because I'm going to exercise to burn the calories, or burn more calories. That it can be still a outcome, but try to not expect very much of it, because if you do resistance training, you probably don't burn as much calories as you think you do. And you probably know or feel like you're burning a lot of calories, especially if you're training really hard.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't really equate to more calories burned or as much as you think you would. And cardio probably burns a little bit more calories, but like if you rely on the calories reflected on the machine, like the elliptical or the treadmill, they very inaccurate. Like they kind of say every minute you walk, you burn 10 calories, and that's probably not true. So you can use, I would say, and I recommend this to a lot of people and my clients, is that if you're going to use the calories on the machine, use it as an intensity variable. For example, if you want to do something very intense, let's say I want to burn 100 calories in this machine, but the faster I go, the faster I'm going to get to that number. If I go slower, I'm going to take longer time to reach that number. But not because I'm thinking about how many calories I'm burning, but how fast I get there so I can get much more intensity out of my workout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's more like if you want to burn 100 calories in, let's say, 15 minutes, and you're gonna have to be doing like treadmill sprints, rather
Yes,
than if you're just
exactly.
doing like a long 30-minute casual
Yes.
jog, then it'll take you longer to get to that point.
But even if you achieve the 100 calories, it doesn't mean like you burn 100 calories. It's just
Right.
intensity measurement, kind
Right.
of.
So how does that work with, like, I mean, again, the big question would here be that eating back the calories. I mean, I know you just mentioned that you shouldn't be much focused on your calories that you burn, rather than you should cut your calories from the diet. But does that increase, let's say someone who's like a professional biker, right? I mean, they're absolutely like doing intense workouts, they're like riding a bike 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it is. And let's say they burn 300 calories and they're in a deficit of 500. So now does that create a 800 calorie deficit for them? And if it does, should they eat those 300 calories back to just keep the 500 deficit?
Well, that's why you always, when you're calculating your TDEE, you're putting an estimation of your activity factor in there. So you are practically saying, if I train 4 times a week and I roughly, you could say depending on the exercise, you will have some level of energy expenditure. And that is, there is actually a list of activities and how many calories,
You
estimated
burn.
calories you burn per hour or per minute.
Right.
So you can have an estimation, and that's why the activity factor comes handy, because you can say, whether you use the activity factor, which can be 1.55 or 1.2 or 1.8, depending on the intensity, on how active you are. Or you can go and do this calculation more, like if it's more, you specifically know how many minutes and what type of exercise you do on every time you go to the gym. You can have your weekly total minutes of that particular activity that you spend in there, and that is equivalent to a specific calorie number. So if you multiply the number of minutes you spend doing that activity, that is going to be equivalent to a number that will tell you, well, this is the estimated calories you might be using for that particular activity, and at the end of these total sessions by the end of the week. So if you divide that by 7, you'll have a number that you probably are spending per day. So it's just an average that is going to give you, well, 100 calories. So you will just add your basal metabolic rate, and you will add your extra calories for the activity purposes. So you'll have that information, and that's roughly eating back your calories, but you're calculating that even before you actually exercise, or you go to implement this number. But before you even do that, you're calculating what your basal metabolic rate is, what your total calorie expenditure is based on your physical activity, and that's accounting for that activity you're putting and the exercises you're doing at the gym and the calories you're burning at the gym or wherever you're training. But that is accounted for, so you don't necessarily you don't need to also track back and eat back the calories that is being told by your phone or your watch, because that's being already calculated if you're doing that kind of like in a sequential way.
Makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Astrid, just if you don't mind, give me like 2 minutes. I think I'm having a connection issue real quick. I'm gonna send you a link in about 2 minutes or even a minute, not even. I'm gonna reset my network real quick if that's okay for you.
Yeah, I have to go very soon though.
Yeah, we only have about 10 minutes of this and we're gonna wrap up within those 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, just give me about 2 minutes. I'm about to send it to you right now. All right, can you hear me?
I'm back.
All right, now sorry about that. It's just that we've been having a bad weather here, so I think my network was having some issues. But again, we'll just continue it, and I'll let you go quickly. So I know you talked about like how eating back calories is essentially, it's again an estimate. You know, you shouldn't think of a thing as like, hey, I burned 500 calories, so I'm gonna go eat a cheeseburger and just put those 500 calories back. You know, it's more of a creating that deficit from nutrition in itself. Now, actually, one really common thing I guess you have seen, or maybe it's an issue that you've come across, it might be a little bit of a controversy when it comes to nutrition. What is it good or bad to consume sodium? You know, how does sodium play when it comes to, let's say, your body looking soft, or you holding water, or you feel bloated? How does sodium factor in when it comes to nutrition for in your experience, and what have you seen when it comes to sodium?
Well, sodium is an electrolyte that is very important in body water regulation, and you have all important mechanisms in your body to regulate sodium and water very, very well. So you don't necessarily need to stress too much about sodium intake unless you erratically consume very different amounts on a daily basis. But if you're very consistent with your sodium intake, even if it's a little bit higher than normal, you really don't see much of a difference. You have to be careful to eat too low sodium though. So it is dangerous to have a very low sodium intake. So a lot of people with fear of eating sodium, they actually go and not eat sodium at all. And that is going to get your body find a way to trigger it anyhow. And if you don't consume directly sodium from added salt, you will still get your body's going to still get away by putting yourself to crave foods that are salty, or just it's going to find its way. But at the end of the day, the only concern would be if you're someone who is sodium sensitive or have hypertension, and the hypertension is sodium sensitive. Like that would be the only way that you'll see that you need to pay attention to your sodium intake a little bit more, and make sure you're not exceeding or eating an excessive amount of it. But the only caveat here is if you're someone who's sodium sensitive. And if you're sodium sensitive and you consume sodium, that could affect your body water fluctuations, but a little bit more, and that could affect directly your blood pressure. So that would be the only thing I would be concerned about. But actually, if you're someone who's an athlete, someone who is active, or you sweat a lot, you actually need quite a little bit of sodium, and it seems to be a little bit more than what has been suggested by dietary guidelines. So dietary guidelines suggest that we have at least about 5 grams of salts per day.
Okay.
Which is about 2,300 milligrams of sodium. But when we combine sodium in their natural state that we see in salt is sodium chloride. We have chloride and sodium together is about 5 grams. So 5 grams of salt, like actual added salt, is what we kind of seems to be recommended, like just a teaspoon of salt. That's what is recommended, but a lot of people eat by a lot more than that, and it's still it's still fine. It's still okay. You just need to pay attention whether you're someone who has sodium sensitivity, and if you do, and you have hypertension and cardiac uh, issues as a background, you probably have to consult with your doctor what's best for you.
Yeah, and the reason why I asked it because like a lot of plant-based diets, like people who are on plant-based diet, a lot of their food consumes high amounts of sodium. And it's interesting you mentioned 2300 as a number because MyFitnessPal, the most common used app, gives you that number to hit for your sodium. So I think as you mentioned, like for people listening, sodium is not your enemy, carbs are not your enemy. And we talked a lot about how nutrition, the basis to get to nutrition, right? Nutrition is like starting slow and starting on a foundation with basics, getting your basics right. Now, Astrid, just before you leave, some of the tips that you have for people who want to maintain a healthy relationship with food and have nutrition long term for them, and how they can avoid some of these myths of like completely depleting carbs or like completely eliminating a food group. What would you say for them?
Let's start with the basics. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't put any food in a pedestal or demonize any foods, because we can see all foods in a spectrum. Some are more nutritious, some others are not as nutritious, but they all can fit in a healthy diet and balanced diet. And if you practice the 80-20 rule, I think that's a pretty sound advice for you to kind of know that if your diet is mostly whole foods, really nutrient dense, you can still fit in 20% from other foods that they just are part of life. So yeah, I think there's a summarize up everything that sounds like balance and sustainability.
Absolutely. So basically, enjoy life, enjoy your food, and just do it in moderation. Now, two quick things for you. One person, dead or alive, that you ever wanted to work with, or like be like, this is the person I want to see how his nutrition is. Could be an athlete, could be a celebrity, could be someone that you work with that you ever like thought about, or would be interested to work with that person?
Ooh, I have no idea. You caught me out of um I don't know. I'm really bad at knowing names and everything. I would probably skip that question because I have no idea. I
That's
don't
all right.
really I don't really know very much. Maybe just delete this question because I'm very bad at these
That's all right. That's not a problem.
questions.
Well, the second question is it's on the same lines, might be easier. One person maybe you want to work out with or train with, or you're like, this is the person that I really want to be in the gym with.
Okay, well, that's not so difficult. Um, I'm not a person who likes to train with anyone, to be honest. I am someone who when I'm at the gym, I'm just focused on doing
Your own
my
thing. Yep.
training, and I don't really like speaking and chatting. But
Yeah.
I actually had a really nice workout once with Holly Baxter. I did
Nice.
train with her um, here in Australia when we met, and it was quite a interesting training because I think it's really important to find someone who trains at your own intensity and has the same goals. And we were both like really connected and focused on our training and pushing ourselves, each other as much as we could. So that was nice. That was an interesting training because I had never worked out with someone kind of at my level, and it's really cool to kind of interact with someone pushing yourself and actually makes you train harder. So that's cool. So yeah, I would say her, or I don't know, anyone who kind of is at my level, but if you never know whether it's someone is at your
Absolutely.
level of intensity or they want to achieve the same goals. But it was really cool. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. You actually thought about it and gave an answer. Thank you so much. Now, where can people find you, Astrid? The listeners will be interested to know, when you want to work with you, we want to see your work. Where can people find you and what do you offer?
So I do currently work with Team BioLane. So you can, if you're interested in knowing more about me, you can visit my website, Astrid dietitian.com, where you see a little bit more of my background, or you can request or apply for coaching either through BioLane, biolane.com// coaching, or you can apply directly in my website, and basically it's kind of the same, and I can get back to you with more information about coaching. And you can follow me in Instagram and at @tdiet_dietitian. That's where I'm the most active, and you can DM me there and we can have a chat. That's where I'm mostly active, and I have my little YouTube channel that I've been growing for the past 6 months, that I have quite a few interviews with the biggest in the industry, a lot of good people, and yeah, interesting conversations and interviews about nutrition, health, and everything you can imagine about well-being and mindset.
Sure, absolutely. And I've personally learned a lot from your Instagram page. And I know you're located in Australia, but for people listening, she does do online work too, so you can be from anywhere in the world, and Astrid will help you out. Thank you so much for being with us, Astrid, today. And we really hope to bring you back again to talk more about different aspects of nutrition. Take care and have a good day.
Bye bye. Thank you so much.